Hey everybody, welcome back to Call of Warhammer, beginning of the end times. I am Any Pride, and the Skaven have hit the battlefield in force as Grey Seers preach their words of ruin atop their demonic screaming bells. Poison Wind Globadiers wheeze and whinge as the air fills with noxious fumes. Elite Albino Guard of Clan Skryre and the Storm Vermin of Clan Rictus and Moors gather to put the Dwarfs of the Karaz Ankor and the Chaos Dwarfs of Zharr Naggrund into an early grave. Warp Lightning Cannons, Warpfire Throwers, tons of different Skaven weapon teams, and even some Warplock Jezzails will be joining the fight. So the game plan is simple. Let the slaves and the clan rats soak up the dwarven artillery, throw them into the meat grinder, and then blow everything the hell up in a hail of warp shot and noxious gas. Across the battlefield, wait the dwarfs and the Chaos Dwarfs. Not an alliance you see every day, but it's pretty safe to say if you live in the Warhammer world, you either don't know Skaven exist, or you absolutely despise them. Not a whole lot in between. And the Dawi cousins' hate for the Ratmen has triumphed over their hate for each other, at least for the moment. The followers of Hashut, Father of Darkness, have a pretty terrifying army. Bull Centaurs, twisted fusions of ferocious bulls, and wickedly intelligent dwarfs provide some potent mobility and killing power. Mighty Throgs, Hobgoblin despoilers, and a whole lot of ranged firepower on the field. Death rockets, a Hellcannon, and the Infernal Guard in their black shard armor, some equipped with fire glaives for long-range sniping and immolation, and some pretty embarrassing shooting from the Hellcannon. Not the most accurate artillery piece in Call of Warhammer, beginning of the end times, but even with the ranged firepower on the field for the Skaven, it's time to close the gap and get into close quarters combat. Against a lot of races, the Skaven can afford to sit back and blow them apart with their stupidly powerful but wildly inaccurate ranged weaponry, but the demon forces of Zharr Naggrund know how to spit out some pretty terrifying artillery, if nothing else. Can't afford to sit back and trade shots with them. Warp Lightning Cannon got a real nice shot off into the middle of those loose formation Hobgoblin archers, who will actually do quite a number on the relatively low armor of the Skaven in the front, and some nasty volleys from the Warplock Jezzails, who are a fantastic ranged weapon team. They're going to be trading some nice shots with the Quarrelers and make it a bit easier for those front ranks to make it into melee with minimal losses, as a couple of Warpstone bullets go flying overhead, finding their target amongst the Infernal Guard. And here come the Raki boys. Here come the Skaven slaves to soak up all of that damage. Lots of arrows going off, and they are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Just meat shield for the rest of the army. And here it comes. Hordes and hordes of Thagaraki. Poison Wind going off in the middle of the Infernal Guard, and Warpfire Throwers opening up now as well. That effect looks so cool in this mod. And the Bull Centaur General has already gone down, skewered on a Storm Vermin Halberd, and the Hellcannon shooting into the Screaming Bell and knocking that out of the fight, killing a couple Storm Vermin as well. That's a big deal. The Screaming Bell is a gigantic linchpin, essentially, for the Skaven morale, making sure they stay in the fight. Gigantic leadership buff for them. With that gone, it's going to be a lot harder to keep the Skaven slaves and the clan rats in melee without running for the hills. But the Albino Guard are seeking out those Bull Centaurs, trying to slaughter them with their halberds and their armor piercing. And those weapon teams, man, the morale penalties from those will get even elite units running if you can stack up Warpfire Throwers, Warp Lightning Cannons, and a Jezzail volley or two. That'll get even the most elite units running away. So over on the other side, the Skaven and the Dwarfs of the Karaz Ankor are engaging in melee, and the battle's already raging on a pretty massive scale. Warplock Jezzail fire coming in, destroying those rangers in the background as throwing axes whip through the air, and the Dwarf Warriors punch through the center of the clan rats and the slave rats. And actually, some of them are routing the wrong way into the teeth of the Dwarf defense. Warpfire Throwers shooting in. And yeah, this is quintessential Skaven tactics. Let the clan rats and the slave rats take all that damage, as we're seeing some really nice organ gun volleys going into the middle of the Skaven hordes as well. But let all those Skaven clan rats and slave rats die, and then just fire into them, pin down the Dwarf Warriors, and just burn everything alive. That's how it's going right now. It's been an interesting engagement so far. Longbeards and Storm Vermin fighting on the flanks. The Storm Vermin can wrap around, get behind the Dwarf line. They can cause some serious damage with the rear charge. Balance bar shifting a little bit in the Dwarf's favor, but so much fire being concentrated on the center at that Dwarfen shield wall. They're getting slaughtered, man. That is brutal stuff right there. I don't want to commit my Albino Guard right there. because I can just let them get shredded without worrying about friendly fire at the moment. But there are some Bugman's Rangers looking to reinforce pretty soon here. And J-Bob and Gojira fighting with the Chaos Dwarfs and the Skaven on this side. Those Jezzails are probably going to die, but J-Bob's doing a really good job here with his range units. They're all spread out, and they're all firing in from different angles, and there's just no way that one Bull Centaur unit can tie them all down. So getting shot from multiple angles, not sure how long that will be able to survive. Over here, the Poison Wind Globadiers get shot to pieces by those Quarrelers, but they are causing some serious carnage on the main line. Left flank of the Dwarf is crumbling a bit as the Ironbreakers charge forward to try to reinforce and make sure those Longbeards can rally. More Jezzail volleys flying overhead, and it is just absolute carnage in the center here as the weapon teams continue to fire in. And really not a whole lot has been done about them. The Quarrelers are trying to take them down, but they're just getting shot to pieces by the Jezzails from long range. And those Jezzails will win 1v1 against Quarrelers from long range if you let them stay alive. Storm Vermin have made it around the flank now, cleaning up some of the range units in the background. And yeah, in loose formation, these Jezzail weapon teams are definitely making a big impact on the game right now. Here come some Bull Centaurs. That could be enough to turn things in. Oh my god, they just stopped completely. They stopped completely. That is the worst thing that could possibly happen to this cavalry. And they're going to get shredded. Lost micro on them, and he's going to get punished heavily for that. Yeah, so many green bullets just from like 3 or 4 different units all scything into them from multiple angles. And that entire cav unit is dead and donezo at this point. Don't think they'll be coming back to the fight. And the Warp Lightning Cannon will get a final shot in there. Looks like the Fang leader for the Skaven Horde on the left flank has just gone down, though. That could maybe cause some chain routing, because I think the Screaming Bell on this side of the field is also dead. Both the Dwarfs and the Chaos Dwarfs did a very good job early on of knocking those Screaming Bells out of the fight. It's so important to kill those things early on, because it really is the main factor in keeping Skaven morale up. And once that goes down, even the Storm Vermin can have a little bit of trouble sticking around in melee for too long. But these Skaven weapon teams are making such a large impact on the game. On both sides, the Globadiers and the Warpfire Throwers have stayed alive for the majority of the battle thus far. And in Medieval 2, if you don't kill the entire weapon team, they will get the ammunition of their fallen brethren, which is not true for the newer Total War games. I think in Total War Warhammer, if you have an archer unit and they lose like half their men, they'll lose half their ammo. Not so in Medieval 2 and its mods. So you have to make sure you finish off those weapon teams or the range units, or they'll just continue firing. And of course that will lower their DPS, but if you let them stay alive, over time they'll still unleash that same amount of carnage. As a Warplock Engineer gets a Dawi hammer to the back of his skull, that might leave a mark. Field behind them just littered with the burning corpses of Warpstone victims. There's some ways to die that aren't so bad, you know, in your own bed, at the age of 80, with a belly full of wine and your lover going down on you, but death by flamethrower is not one of those ways. Pretty awful way to go. I actually can't really think of much of a worse way to go than just being on fire. And I don't know how the Warpstone fire works in Warhammer lore, if it's actually that much different than just regular flame. I would imagine it's probably, just because of the nature of this grimdark universe, it's probably got some extra unpleasant factors to it. Those hobgoblins are getting toasted like a bunch of marshmallows in the back lines. Storm Vermin and a Dwarf artillery crew. Looks like the organ guns or the Dwarf cannon crew was silenced now, and they'll have to wait into melee against the elite Storm Vermin of Clan Moors. Not a good engagement for them whatsoever. And more Storm Vermin charging in from the back, making sure those hobgoblins do not fire any more of their arrows, and they will be running for the red line. So Balance Bar still dead even here, about 10 minutes into the game. Ironbreakers in reserve getting committed now. Probably a little bit. It's interesting he held on to them that long, and we'll see if that ends up working well. Reserves in Medieval 2 are not a bad idea whatsoever. And in Beginning of the End Times, it's true as well. But They could have probably been thrown in on the main line earlier. Maybe that'll be genius. I'm not actually sure. That's interesting. I don't know if he lost micro on them or if that was an intentional usage of just keeping reserves, throwing in some fresh iron breakers in the late game. That might end up being a very good move. We'll see. Some friendly fire, of course, from the Warplock Jezzails and the Fire Throwers. There's a lot of wavering and routing on the field as well. Battle's gotten very spread out, and there are thousands dead on the battlefield. Just pockets of resistance now on both sides. Jezzails getting committed into melee. Actually slaying some dwarf warriors there, and they're running. The Jezzails are doing so much work in this game, man. They're even getting committed into melee. And it looks like a warp lightning cannon just missed a pretty big shot there. Could have done some serious damage if it had been able to make contact with whatever the hell it was shooting at. But the dwarf reserves and the Zharr are beginning to show cracks in their resolve. There is some routing, but the Infernal Guard with Fire Glaives are making their stand here. Getting some nice shots into the flanks of the Storm Vermin, but Jezzails are still firing in as well. And with this charge from the Storm Vermin, that looks like it's going to be enough to cause some routing, which, if this was an earlier edition of the mod, those Infernal Guard would have stayed and fought to the end. But they no longer have 2 HP, and I think their morale was busted down a little bit because, honestly, Chaos Dwarfs were a little bit busted in the mod in general. They were incredibly strong, man. Like, their entire front line, 2 HP, everything incredibly heavily armored and great melee stats, impossible leadership to break. It's probably good they got a little bit of a nerf, because even now, they're still really good. But balance bar is still somehow even. Could still go either way. That Iron Breaker is going to be the make or break, I think, for the Dawi and the Zharr. Will this Iron Breaker be able to hold out and take down these pockets of resistance? The ammo for the Skaven weapon teams at this point has to be out. There can't be much ammo left on them at all, if there's any. But Poison Wind getting some really nice shots, and Warplock Jezzails as well. And those Iron Breakers are stuck between a rock and a hard place right now, getting covered in gas and shot in the face from point blank range. Warp Lightning Cannon, thankfully, from their perspective, missing. If that had hit in the middle of the formation there, it would have killed half the unit easily. Now they're getting flamed. This is a nightmare. This is a nightmare even for the Iron Breakers. The Iron Breakers cannot be expected to stay under that kind of withering fire. They got the morale penalty from the Warp Lightning Cannon, from the Warpfire Throwers, from the Jezzails, which all have independent morale penalties, I think. And yeah, the Iron Breakers, that they were representing half the power bar for that faction. And as soon as they routed, shifted all the way over, and the Skaven will take the field after a bloody and brutal and devastating affair that honestly showed off those weapon teams like crazy. There were some epic moments from the flamethrowers and the Jezzails there. The cannons, actually, the Warp Lightning Cannon was, as we would have expected, I guess, incredibly inaccurate. I'm not sure it got a single good shot off after that first one against the Hobgoblins in the early game. And now the Hellcannon crew and a couple of clan rats, I guess, will fight to the death. One thing I do wish with the teams in this mod, I wish that they could find some way to make that faction bar when you're both the same faction. You can see they've got the fleur-de-lis on the secondary Skaven army. It'd be way better if you could just have Skaven banners on both armies, even if you're the same army, but very, very minor complaint there. So looking at stats, I mean, you can see the Zharr and the dwarfs of the Karaz Ankor both got a ton of kills. That battle absolutely could have gone either way. It was very close up until the last couple seconds there, but I'm not sure enough was done to shut down those Skaven weapon teams. The whole battle kind of revolved around them, and if you're able to kill them early, you're going to be in a really good position to take the game. I mean, they did a great job taking out the Screaming Bells, which was the first priority, no question. After that, taking out the Poison Wind Globadiers and the Jezzails was very difficult. And when you let the Jezzails fire for the entire game, you'll see they'll rack up over 140 kills pretty easy. Globadiers over 200 as well. Hope you guys enjoyed. See you next time. Any Pride signing out for now.